They say the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest on Earth, and something that old doesn't like to be disturbed. Locals have a golden rule: if the woods go silent, you stop. If you hear your mother calling your name from the dark, you run. And if you see a light where there should be no path, you close your eyes. Tonight, we're venturing into the deep hollows where the maps end and the nightmares begin. We've curated 3 of the most disturbing, true stories ever reported from the Blue Ridge, from entities that wear your friend's face to the things that mimic our very breaths. Before we descend into the darkness, hit that subscribe button and join our community of 1,000 seekers. Don't let the silence take you. The oldest mountains in the world don't just have echoes, they have memories that have learned how to hunt. I'm Jax Miller, a 34-year-old land surveyor based out of Asheville, North Carolina, and I've spent the better part of a decade trekking through the deepest, most jagged parts of the Blue Ridge. People from the city come up here for the views and the craft beer, but they don't understand that these woods weren't made for us. They're ancient, indifferent, and in certain pockets of the high country they're downright hostile. I thought I knew every trick the terrain could play on a man's mind until 3 months ago, when I was sent out to mark a boundary line near the edge of the Pisgah National Forest. If you've never been to Appalachia, you need to understand the fog. It isn't like the mist you see in the movies. It's thick, heavy, and tastes like wet copper. It doesn't just roll in, it swallows you whole. One minute you're looking at a stand of ancient oaks, and the next you're standing in a sensory deprivation tank where the world ends 10 feet in front of your face. The locals have rules for the fog. You don't go out in it. You don't look too long into the tree line. And above all else, no matter how much it sounds like someone you love, you never, ever answer the voice in the mist. It was a Tuesday, around 4:30 p.m. I was pushing to finish a 40-acre plot before the light died. The air had turned that bruised purple color it gets before a storm, and then the whiteout hit. It came up from the valley floor like a ghost erasing the ridgeline in seconds. I reached for my GPEs, but the screen was flickering magnetic interference, or maybe just the sheer density of the canopy. I decided to pack it in. I've been in these woods long enough to know when to call it a day. That's when I heard it. Jax, is that you? It was my sister Sarah. But Sarah lives in Charlotte, 3 hours away. My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest. I froze, my hand hovering over my transit bag. Sarah. I almost shouted it. The word was halfway up my throat before I remembered the stories. My grandfather used to sit on his porch with a shotgun across his knees whenever the fog got this thick. He'd tell me, "Jax, the mountain is a mimic. It'll take the shape of your heart's desire just to lead you off a cliff." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, breathing shallowly, listening to the silence that follows a voice that shouldn't exist. "Jax, please. I've twisted my ankle. I'm by the big rock." It sounded exactly like her. The same slight southern drawl, the same frantic pitch she gets when she's panicked. It was coming from the thicket to my left, maybe 50 yards into the brush where the terrain drops off into a steep, rocky ravine. If I hadn't known she was in Charlotte, I would have sprinted into the white without a second thought. But I did know, and that knowledge turned the sound of her voice into something sickening. I started moving back toward where I thought my truck was parked, keeping my eyes locked on my compass. The needle was spinning, not a slow drift, but a frantic, dizzying whirl. I felt a cold sweat break out under my flannel shirt. The woods had gone dead silent. No birds, no insects, not even the wind through the pines, just that heavy, suffocating fog and the sound of my own pulse. "Jax, why won't you answer me? I can see your jacket." It had shifted. It was no longer coming from the ravine, it was behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew if I turned around, I'd see something that looked like Sarah, but wasn't. I'd see something with eyes too wide and a mouth that didn't move quite right. I picked up my pace, stumbling over a protruding root. My boots skidded on the damp moss, and I went down hard on one knee. The moment I hit the ground, the voice changed. The panic in Sarah's voice vanished, replaced by a flat, monotone repetition. "Jax, Jax, Jax, Jax." It sounded like a skipping record. It wasn't even trying to sound human anymore. It was just a vibration in the air, a rhythmic pulsing that made my teeth ache. I scrambled up, ignoring the sharp pain in my kneecap, and began to run. I didn't care about the boundary lines or my expensive equipment anymore. I just wanted to feel the gravel of the access road under my feet. As I ran, the fog began to shimmer, That's the only way I can describe it. It was like looking through a heat haze on a highway. The trees seemed to stretch and warp, their branches reaching down like skeletal fingers, and through the shimmer I saw a shape. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and impossibly thin. It was pale, the color of a drowned man's skin, and it was moving through the trees with a sickening, fluid grace. It didn't have a face, not really, just a smooth, featureless surface where a person's features should be, except for a wide, dark slit that acted as a mouth. It was drifting, keeping pace with me effortlessly. Every few seconds that slit would open, and my sister's voice would pour out of it. "Jax, wait up, I found a shortcut." I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I just kept my head down and sprinted toward the faint silhouette of my Chevy Silverado. I could see the reflection of the fog in the windshield. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers shaking so violently I dropped them in the mud. The thing was at the edge of the clearing now. It stopped just where the trees met the tall grass. It stood there, swaying slightly, like a blade of grass in a breeze. The fog swirled around it, almost as if the mist was emanating from its very skin. "Jax," it said, but this time the voice wasn't Sarah's, it was mine. It was my own voice, perfectly replicated, calling back to me from the tree line. "Jax, don't leave. We're almost done with the survey." I lunged for my keys, grabbed them, and dived into the cab. I slammed the lock button so hard I nearly broke the plastic. I didn't even look back as I cranked the engine. The truck roared to life, the headlights cutting through the gloom, and for a split second, the beams hit the creature full on. In the light, it looked even worse. It wasn't solid. It was translucent, like it was made of the fog itself, but held together by some dark, ancient intent. It didn't flinch at the light. It just stood there and opened that black slit of a mouth. I shifted into reverse and floored it, the tires throwing mud as I fishtailed back onto the main access road. I didn't stop until I hit the paved highway 10 miles down the mountain. I pulled over at a gas station, my hand still locked onto the steering wheel, and I vomited right there in the parking lot. When I finally got home, I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed because she was in the middle of a dinner date. Hearing her real voice, the messy, imperfect, living sound of it made me weep like a child. I didn't tell her what happened. How could I? She'd think I'd had a stroke or spent too much time haunting the moonshine stills. I went back to that site a week later, but only because my boss threatened to fire me. I didn't go alone. I took my cousin, a guy who spent 3 tours in the sandbox and carries a .45 on his hip, like it's an extra limb. The fog was gone, the sun was out, and the woods looked like a postcard. We found my transit bag exactly where I'd dropped it, but when I opened it, the lenses of my surveying equipment were shattered, not just cracked, pulverized into fine white powder. And there, in the mud where I'd fallen, were footprints. They weren't human. They were long, narrow indentations, with no toes and no heel. They followed my tracks all the way to where my truck had been parked. But the most disturbing part wasn't the tracks, it was the trees. Around the clearing where I'd seen the thing, the bark of the oaks had been peeled away in long, vertical strips, and carved into the raw wood of the trees, over and over again in a frantic, jagged script, was my name, Jax, Jax, Jax. I quit that job the next day. I still live in a shovel, but I don't go into the woods anymore. Not for hiking, not for camping, and certainly not for work. Because even now, on quiet nights when the humidity is high and the mist starts to crawl up the mountainside toward my bedroom window, I can hear it. It's faint, like a whisper from a long way off. It's my own voice, calling to me from the dark. And it's asking me if I'm ready to finish the survey. If you ever find yourself in the Appalachians and the air turns thick and white, do yourself a favor. Turn off your ears. Close your mouth. And for the love of God, no matter who you think you hear calling your name, don't you dare answer back. Because the fog doesn't want to talk. It wants to be you. Story 2. If you hear your name being whispered from the canopy of a white oak at 3 in the morning, you don't answer, you don't stop, and you damn sure don't look up. I'm Caleb Miller, a 34-year-old former search and rescue technician currently living on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. I spent nearly a decade pulling tourists out of the brush and off the cliff sides of the Blue Ridge Mountains. People think these mountains are beautiful, and they are. But they're also old. They're older than bones, older than the concept of monsters, and they have a way of reminding you that you're at the bottom of the food chain the moment you forget the rules. In Appalachia, the rules aren't just folklore, they're the only thing keeping the local population from dwindling into nothingness. Growing up in these woods, my grandfather Silas was the one who hammered those rules into my head. He was a hard man, a coal miner who'd seen enough darkness underground to respect the shadows above. He used to tell me, "Caleb, the woods have eyes, but they don't always have faces. If the crickets go quiet, you go inside. If you see a door standing alone in a clearing, you turn around. And above all else, boy, never. And I mean never look into the trees after the sun dips below the ridge." For years, I thought it was just mountain superstition. I thought it was a way to keep kids from wandering off and getting lost in the treacherous terrain. Then I joined SAR, and I realized that Silas wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to save me. The incident that changed everything happened in October of 2019. It was one of those crisp, deceptive autumn evenings where the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. We got a call about a missing hiker, a 22-year-old kid named Ethan who'd gone off trail near the Black Mountains. He'd sent a frantic text to his girlfriend that simply read, "Something is following me in the sky." By the time we got the coordinates and reached the last known location, it was nearly midnight. The moon was a sliver of silver, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. Was paired with my senior lead, a veteran named Dave who'd been in the service for 20 years. Dave was a stoic guy, but as we hiked deeper into the dense thicket, I noticed he was keeping his head tilted down. His flashlight was glued to the trail, never once flickering upward toward the towering pines. "Dave," I whispered, the silence of the woods pressing against my eardrums. The kid said something was in the sky. Shouldn't we be checking the ridge line or the upper branches? Dave didn't even look at me. He just gripped his radio tighter. "Keep your eyes on the ground, Miller. We're looking for footprints, not birds. Just do your job." His voice had a tremor I'd never heard before. It was the sound of a man who knew exactly what was up there and had made a conscious decision to pretend it didn't exist. About 2 miles in, the woods went dead. I don't mean quiet. I mean the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the atmosphere has been sucked out of a room. No owls, no wind, no rustle of dry leaves. Just the sound of our own breathing, which suddenly felt far too loud. "Caleb." It was a soft, melodic voice. It sounded exactly like my mother, but my mother had been buried in a cemetery in Virginia for 6 years. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The voice didn't come from the trail ahead. It didn't come from the bushes. It drifted down from above, vibrating through the air like a hum. "Don't," Dave hissed, grabbing my shoulder. He didn't look up. He was staring intensely at a patch of moss by his boots. "It's not her." "You know it's not her?" But it sounded just like... I said don't. Dave's voice was a jagged edge. "Whatever you hear, whatever you think you see in the periphery of your vision, you keep your eyes on the dirt. We find the kid and we get out." It wasn't the feeling of a predator stalking you from the brush. It was the sensation of something hovering, something suspended in the air, peering down with a curiosity that felt cold and ancient. Then we found Ethan's backpack. It was hanging from a branch of a massive, gnarled hemlock about 20 feet up. The straps were neatly looped around the wood as if someone had carefully placed it there. Below it, on the forest floor, were Ethan's boots. They were perfectly aligned, side by side, pointing toward the trunk of the tree. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, just the empty boots and the bag swaying in a breeze that wasn't there. "Ethan," I shouted, breaking the protocol of silence. "Ethan, are you here? Caleb, help me." The voice came again, but this time it wasn't my mother. It was Ethan's voice. It was thin, reedy, and filled with an agonizing terror. It sounded like it was coming from the very top of the hemlock, where the branches were too thin to support a human's weight. I couldn't help it. Against every instinct, against Silas's warnings and Dave's orders, I flicked my high-lumen tactical light upward. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the underside of the canopy. For a split second, I saw it. It wasn't an animal. It was a pale, elongated shape, woven into the branches like a spider. Its limbs were impossibly long, thin as saplings, and its skin had the texture of wet parchment or gray bark. It didn't have a face, not really. It had a series of slits that moved like gills, and 2 massive, milky white eyes that reflected my light with a dull, sickening glow. But the worst part was Ethan. He was there, or what was left of him. He was being held against the trunk by the creature's spindly limbs. He wasn't dead. His eyes were wide, fixed on me, pleading. The creature had its fingers, if you could call them that, pressed against Ethan's throat, and as it opened one of those slits on its head, Ethan's voice came out of the creature's body. It didn't scream. It just started to descend. It didn't climb down like a primate. It flowed. It moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, its body contorting to match the angles of the branches. It was coming for me because I had acknowledged it. I had broken the rule. I had looked into the trees. "Run," Dave screamed. He didn't need to tell me twice. We bolted. I've never run like that in my life. The forest became a blur of thorns and shadows. Above us, I could hear the sound of branches snapping and a rhythmic thud, 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 thud as the thing swung from tree to tree, keeping pace with us. It was laughing. Not a human laugh, but a series of clicks that mimicked the sound of a human chuckle. It stayed in the canopy, never touching the ground. Every time I dared to glance sideways, I could see the pale blur of its body moving through the upper limbs, a ghost in the machinery of the forest. It was waiting for us to trip. It was waiting for us to stop. The moment we stepped out of the tree line and into the gravel lot, the clicking stopped. The heavy silence lifted. The crickets started chirping again, a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that felt like a choir of angels. Dave and I sat on the tailgate of his truck, gasping for air. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The other SAR teams were getting ready to head out, but Dave walked over to the coordinator and told him the area was too dangerous due to unstable terrain and predatory animal activity. He didn't mention a thing in the trees. He knew they wouldn't believe him, or worse, they'd go looking for it. Ethan was never found. A week later, the search was officially called off. They listed him as missing and presumed dead, likely a victim of exposure or a fall. But I know better. Sometimes, when the wind is right and the night is quiet, I can still hear his voice drifting from the woods behind my house. I quit SAR a month later. I couldn't handle the woods anymore. Every time I see a tall tree, I find myself looking at the ground, my neck stiff with the effort of not glancing up. People ask me why the locals in Appalachia are so strange, why we keep our curtains closed even in the heat of summer, why we never have skylights in our cabins. They think we're just backward or overly religious. They don't understand that the mountains are inhabited by things that have been here since the world was cold and dark. These things don't hunt like wolves or bears. They hunt through recognition. They hunt the moment you notice them. If you ever find yourself hiking in the high country of North Carolina or the deep hollows of West Virginia, enjoy the view. Take photos of the sunsets and the rolling mist. But the moment the sun slips behind the peaks, put your head down. Focus on the trail. Ignore the voices that sound like your loved ones. Ignore the snapping of branches above your head. Because up there, in the dark webbing of the ancient oaks, something is waiting for you to look up. And once you see it, it never, ever lets you go. I still live near the mountains, but I don't go out after dark anymore. My grandfather Silas was right about everything. He died with his eyes closed tight, even in his coffin. At the time, I thought it was just the way the mortician did his work. Now, I realize Silas was probably just making sure he didn't accidentally catch a glimpse of the ceiling. There's a reason the trees here are so thick and the canopy so dark. It's not just nature, it's a shroud. And if you're smart, you'll leave that shroud exactly where it is. Stay on the path, keep your eyes on your boots, and no matter what you hear, don't look into the trees. Story 3. If you hear your name being called from the deep shadows of the Blue Ridge timber, know you didn't, and God help you if you decide to answer back. My name is Jackson Jax Miller. I'm 36 years old, and for a decade, I worked as a specialized search and rescue technician based out of Asheville, North Carolina. People come to the Appalachians for the views, the rolling blue mist, and the sense of peace that only these ancient weathered peaks can provide. But these mountains are older than bones, older than the Atlantic Ocean, and older than the very concept of mercy. I've spent thousands of hours in the backcountry, and I've seen things that the National Park Service doesn't put in the brochures. There are rules here. They aren't written on any signs, but the locals know them by heart. If you want to make it out of the Blue Ridge with your soul intact, you learn to follow the 3 rules, or you become another unresolved case file on a ranger's desk. The first rule is the one that most tourists break without even thinking: never look up into the trees after the sun dips below the ridgeline. I learned why during my 3rd year on the job. We were looking for a college kid who'd wandered off the trail near Craggy Gardens. It was late October, that time of year when the air gets thin and sharp like a razor. The mist was thick, what we called the smoke, and it felt like it was swallowing our headlamps. I was paired with an old-timer named Silas, a man who had more scars than stories. We were moving through a dense stand of hemlocks when the woods went dead silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just that heavy, pressurized silence that makes your ears pop. Silas grabbed my shoulder so hard his fingers bruised the bone. "Keep your eyes on the dirt, Jax," he whispered. His voice was shaking. I didn't understand then. I started to tilt my head back, curious about a scratching sound I heard coming from the canopy 30 feet up. Silas shoved my head down. He told me that there are things in these mountains that have been here since the world was dark. They don't have bodies like ours. They have shapes made of shadow and hunger. They hang in the branches, mimicking the sway of the limbs, waiting for you to make eye contact. Because once you see them, they know you've acknowledged them. And once you acknowledge them, they can follow you home. We found the kids' boots the next morning, just the boots. They were tucked neatly at the base of a massive oak, perfectly laced, with no sign of the person who had been wearing them. The branches above were stripped of bark, as if something heavy had been dragging itself through the heights. That leads me to the second rule, which is arguably more dangerous because it preys on your humanity. If you hear someone crying for help, and the voice sounds too perfect, you keep walking. It sounds cold, I know. I'm a SAR tech. My whole life is about answering that cry. But the Appalachians have a way of echoing things that aren't human. About 4 years ago, I was responding to a solo call near the Linville Gorge. A hiker had reported a woman screaming for help near the edge of a steep drop-off. I got there just as twilight was turning the world purple. I heard her. "Help me. Please, I've broken my leg. I'm right here." The voice was clear, too clear. It didn't have the rasp of someone in pain, the hitch of someone sobbing, or the echo you'd expect from the rock walls. It sounded like a recording played on a loop, identical in pitch and cadence every single time. I clicked on my high-output flashlight and scanned the ravine. Nothing. Then, the voice changed. It shifted from a woman's plea to my own mother's voice. "Jackson, my mother has been dead since 2012. The hair on my arm stood straight up. The mimics of the Blue Ridge don't just copy sounds. They pull from your head. They find the frequency of your grief, and they broadcast it back to you. I did what the old-timers taught me. I bit my tongue until I tasted copper, focused on the metallic tang of the blood, and started reciting the alphabet backward out loud. You have to break the trance. You have to remind your brain that what you're hearing is a biological lure, like an anglerfish in the deep sea. I backed out of that gorge without ever turning my back on the woods. When I got back to the truck, there were long, thin, muddy handprints on the driver's side window. 5 fingers, but the middle one was twice as long as the others. But the third rule is the one that haunts my nightmares. It's the one that eventually made me hand in my badge and move into a cabin with 3 deadbolts on every door. Rule number 3, never, ever answer back when the woods call your name. It happened on a Tuesday, a quiet, humid afternoon in the Pisgah National Forest. I wasn't even on a call, I was just marking some new trail deviations. I was deep in a laurel slick, those tangled messes of rhododendrons where you can't see 5 feet in front of your face. Out of the green gloom, I heard it. "Jax, hey Jax." It sounded like my best friend, Miller, who was back at the station 5 miles away. I almost answered. The word "yeah" was sitting on the tip of my tongue. But I remembered Silas. I remembered the boots. I stayed silent. I kept moving, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Jax, wait up. I found something." The voice called again. It was closer now, maybe 20 feet to my left, inside the thicket where no human could move without snapping a branch. But there was no sound of snapping wood, no rustle of leaves, just the voice, floating through the air like smoke. I picked up my pace. The voice started to distort. It lost the Miller quality and became a jumble of every voice I'd ever heard. It was a chorus of the missing. It was the college kid from Craggy Gardens. It was the woman from the gorge. It was a low, vibrated in my teeth. "JJJ Jax, Jax, Jax." I broke into a dead run. I didn't care about the gear I was dropping or the briars tearing at my face. I could feel something behind me, not a physical presence but a pressure, like the air was being sucked out of the forest, creating a vacuum that wanted to pull me backward. I burst out onto the Forest Service road, stumbling into the gravel, and didn't stop until I reached my truck. I sat there for an hour, doors locked, engine idling, staring into the rearview mirror. In the tree line, just where the shadows were deepest, I saw the laurel bushes part. GDEE. It wasn't a face, really. It was a pale, elongated mask of skin with no eyes, just two dark indentations where eyes should be. It opened a mouth that was too wide for its head and whispered my name one last time, not with vocal cords, but by clicking its teeth together to mimic the syllables. I quit the next day. People asked me why I still live here if I'm so scared. The truth is, once the Blue Ridge marks you, once you've heard it call your name and you've seen what hangs in the trees, you can't really leave. It's like a string is tied to your heart, and the other end is buried deep in the Appalachian soil. You stay close because you know that if you go too far, the string will snap, and you'll be lost forever in a different way. So, if you're planning a trip to our neck of the woods, please enjoy the overlooks. Take your photos of the sunset. But when that sun disappears behind the peaks and the mist starts crawling up the hollows, get inside, close your curtains. And if you hear a familiar voice calling you from the dark, or a scratching on the roof, or a crying child in the distance, do yourself a favor, turn up the radio, look at the floor, and keep your mouth shut. The mountains are old, and they are very, very hungry.